Alrighty.
All right, so I'm not. So I see someone heard me say we implement the studies, and so I'll stop right around there. Basically, once one of the other four elements selects your proposal, we will work with you to define the requirements and help you fit in with the other investigators in a particular campaign, whether it's flight or ground, to help you perform the research, collect the data, and then get those data delivered to you. Thanks.
Steve?
I'm sorry, I guess I lost my audio. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So we also fund the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. We call them TRISH, through a cooperative agreement. And what they do for us is they pursue disruptive breakthrough approaches. We think of them sort of like our venture capitalists. They're out there doing high risk, high reward work that's difficult for a government agency to do. And then finally, we collaborate with other agencies and NASA programs. For example, we work with space biology, and you may have heard of the veggie experiment. What that experiment involves is growing edible plants aboard the space station, so lettuce and radishes, eventually tomatoes, things like that. And the space biology program is interested in how the plants grow, how you store the seeds, how much water you have to give them, and things like that. Our part is what are the psychological benefits to growing the plants as well as eating the plants. You can't imagine the benefits you get from having a fresh salad for the first time in months and months after eating processed food. And then also just the effects of growing the plants, almost treating it like a pet. And so the two groups together collaborate on research like this. Next slide, please. So we have a number of venues for conducting research. Obviously, the International Space Station, and then other vehicles as they become ready to get us to the moon. The NASA Space Radiation Laboratory is on Long Island, and that's where we do most of our irradiation work. The NVHAB facility down the bottom left is a bed rest facility in Cologne, Germany, and that's where we do most of our current bed rest studies. We also have lots of isolation studies in Antarctica. We use several different platforms there. And then additional isolation facilities are available in Houston. The HERA, Human Exploration Research Analog, is a shorter duration research analog. And for long duration isolation studies, we collaborate with our colleagues in Moscow, and we have a facility there. Next slide. So just to give you an idea of the amount of work that we do, here is our integrated path to risk reduction. So on the left-hand side, you can see all the different risks we've identified to the crew members for exploration spaceflight. And then as it trails out, you can see the red are the things that are not controlled and things we need to solve before we go to Mars. Then yellow is things that we know something about, but we still need to do a fair amount of work on. Green are things that we're accepting those risks. We think we can control them well enough. And blue is where we're optimizing that risk. Next slide. So as you can imagine, there are a number of constraints that we have to do this type of work. Not only is it difficult and expensive to do research aboard the International Space Station, but we also have few test subjects that go through our analogs as well. For this reason, we have a different view on research than NIH. A research study does not need to be highly innovative in and of itself in order to be considered, but it does have to address our risk, and it does have to critically address the gaps of HRP. So it's more important to be focused and specific on meeting our requirements than it is to be a highly innovative study. Now, don't get us wrong, everybody likes innovative research, but the risks themselves are more important for us. Next slide, please. So again, due to the low-end nature Statistical considerations are extremely important to us. Robust statistical design of the experiments will make more efficient use of our limited resources. Typically, research studies, I would say on average, they get 12 test subjects. And so the statistics that you need to do for this are not the average statistics. You won't always achieve the ideal sample size. You need to have a good grasp of statistical power, control of your extraneous variables, etc. One of the sampling procedures that's used is shown here on the graph, where you get a representation of your power depending on how many test subjects you have. We highly encourage this type of analysis. For the Step 2 proposals, they must include a dedicated section on describing your statistical approach or a very clear justification for not needing one. Our review panels all include statisticians, and so the statistical part of your proposal will be scrutinized quite tightly. So we suggest a very robust statistical section. Next slide, please. So just to give a brief overview of the solicitation process, it's a two-step process. Step 1, proposals are submitted to NASA and should include a synopsis of the intended research. The page limit for a Step 1 proposal is 1 page. This is very important. It's important to please read the entire solicitation. We've been having a fair number of proposals lately where they don't read the instructions and they submit proposals that are either over budget or don't specifically address the call. These proposals will not be reviewed. So please pay close attention to the call because you don't want to waste your own time. Step 1 proposals are due by the 1st of September at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Step 1 proposals must follow the specifications listed in the solicitation. Only applicants who submit relevant Step 1 proposals will be invited to submit Step 2. The Step 2 proposal window opens on October 1st. So any invited Step 2 proposals are due by the 1st of December at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Page limits for the central scientific and technical description are 10 pages for Appendix A and 5 pages for Appendix B. All Step 2 proposals will be reviewed for merit and programmatic relevance, so it's a two-part review process. Merit peer review will be conducted by a panel of scientific and technical subject matter experts, and then NASA will evaluate the programmatic balance, feasibility, and cost of the proposals. We expect to announce the decisions for the final awards by April of 2021. Next slide. So for Appendix A, we have one topic, habitability and sensory stimulation for long-duration missions. The solicitation is for 3 years total in duration, with $400,000 limit per year for a total of $1.2 million. Please don't write a 4-year study, and please don't propose to go over budget. Next slide, please. For Appendix B, this is our omnibus section. So omnibus solicitations are short-term investigations or technology development projects that provide innovative approaches to any of the risks and knowledge gaps that are contained in that integrated research plan that I just showed you. So this is a little different from the previous slide where that's a very specific call. This is a more open call, limited to 1 year in duration and $150,000 total. Now within the omnibus, there's a different grant called the Basic Investigations Opportunity for Investigators New to NASA. We call that the BINI. So for this one, the BINI is even more open, and it's for investigators who have not received research funding within the past 10 years from NASA. If you fit within this category, the difference here is you're allowed to request an additional 1 year of funding and an additional $150,000. But that's not from the beginning, that's an extension. So for all of the omnibus studies, flight experiments are not solicited, only ground and analog studies. This is very important. If you propose to do a flight study in an omnibus, it will not be selected. Again, these are for 1 year in duration. There is a 1 year costed extension for the BINI, as I mentioned, but that's only for exceptional progress and results. Next slide, please. So that's all I have as an overview. I guess the next part now is to take questions from the folks listening, and that will be through the chat function. I see a question from Lisa. How many awards are expected for each? Manish, how many are we planning?
We're expecting 1 to 2 awards for A and maybe 10 to 12 for Appendix B.
Great, thank you, Manish. For BINI, do we need to reach out to the specific element scientist to give a short overview before step 1? No, that is not a requirement. You should indicate, though, in your proposal that it is a BINI. From Joey Savage, in regards to Appendix A, could sensory stimulation include novel foods? Tom?
Yeah, thank you. That could potentially be part of an approach, but it certainly wasn't envisaged to be the total approach. So certainly food can play an important role in sensory stimulation, but we're looking for a more complete package than just food alone, and in particular modifications to the habitat. Now, the way you prepare the food could include that, but it's more habitat and sensory stimulation, so food could be a part, but not the total part.
Thank you, Tom. From Michael P. How long between selection and integration into an analog study, i.e. HERA or high seas? We do not support high seas, so that would be HERA or NEK or Antarctica. Is that included in the 3 years? Yes, it's 3 years total time. From Kyle, are the bed rest costs built into the grant, or are they covered by some other funds? The funds for the facilities themselves are covered by NASA. From JJ, for the BINI, is it possible to apply as a postdoctoral researcher as the PI? My supervisor has already received NASA funding as a co-PI. Yes, we do not have restrictions, so as a postdoctoral researcher, you are allowed to apply as a PI. From David, do we need to provide a robust statistical section for Omnibus B? Absolutely. From Caitlin, what type of low gravity analogs are available? Must those risks be included as part of an Appendix A submission?
You want me to address that, Steve?
Yeah, could you please?
Yeah, so one type of low gravity analog is obviously the ISS. It's a 3-year grant in Appendix A, so it's possible to propose for a flight study. It's more challenging to get that done because we're primarily wanting that to be the results to be achieved within a ground analog to be demonstrated there first. but certainly the International Space Station is a low-gravity analog, and it would just require some justification and probably some luck, because we're pretty much kind of overtaxed right now in terms of missions that we're putting on the space station, and this would probably not get on space station during that 3-year time frame. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. From David, regarding eligibility, are U.S. subsidiaries of foreign-owned R&D companies eligible to apply? Manish, do you know the answer to this?
Yes, as long as that U.S. subsidiary has a U.S. Dun & Bradstreet number, then that should be fine.
Great, thank you. For Appendix B, can individuals submit proposals and later partner with an institution or organization? Or do we need to be part of a larger organization to apply? As far as I know, we actually make the award to the institution or organization, not directly to the individual. Manish, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So you would need to be part of an institution or organization that has a number that's provided by the government. Vince Cross, the solicitation states that HRP does not want to have work already done and lists a number of entries in the test book, many of which speak to the use of virtual reality. As such, will VR work still be considered, or has that work been fully explored? Tom?
Yeah, and I think this one can apply to both the Omni or the Appendix A. So for the Appendix A, certainly if a virtual reality proposal comes in, it needs to be specific enough that it's targeting the brain domains and pathways that we know are impacted by the monotony and boredom. So it has to be a meaningful activity with a demonstrated change to brain pathways. So it can't just be the virtual reality experience, it's got to be a more targeted intervention. So the answer is yes, it could be, but it's got to be scientifically justified as to why that one, and not in an exploratory way, so to speak.
Great, thank you, Tom. From Wendy, for binning, should we indicate it in the Step 1 submission? Yes, there should be a box to check, I believe, in the submission. Manish, is this correct?
That is correct.
Yep. So yes, please indicate by checking the box. From Kai, are you open to using analog habitats outside of Antarctica, Hera, or Sirius? Tom, do you want to address that?
Sure, I can say for Appendix A, yes, as long as, again, there just needs to be a scientific justification as to why that analog and how you can ensure that it can generalize to the results that we're looking for. And those results would need to generalize to the type of science we also get out of Antarctica, Hera, or Sirius, where we've got a more controlled setting. So the ability to control the setting and demonstrate your experimental procedure within that setting, and then show that it generalizes, is what would be important.
Thank you, Tom. The one thing I'd also like to point out is if you propose to do your work at an analog that is not managed by NASA, that may potentially incur additional costs. So you'd have to take that into account in your proposal. From RG, for Binny, can we propose to do something in Hera? Since Binny is initially a 1-year program where you can get an extension, it's unlikely that you could complete an entire Hera campaign in that time frame. Dr. Stenger, do you agree?
Yes, I agree. It would be very challenging.
Okay, great, thanks. From Christine, are investigators of innovative technologies that reduce one or more risks in the roadmap appropriate if they do not fill a gap? If you're talking about an omnibus award, you must address one of the risks in the path to risk reduction. If it's a BINI, you are allowed more latitude in not necessarily filling a gap. You're allowed to just address effects of spaceflight. From Justin, is it necessary to target one of the risks listed in your chart? What if you are targeting a different risk? Again, if it's Appendix A, you must address the solicitation specifically. If it is for an omnibus in Appendix B, you must address a risk that's listed. If it's a BINI, you're allowed more leeway. From Drew, question for Dr. Williams. Would a communication system with relevance to behavioral health be considered part of the environmental systems that mitigate health risks for Appendix A?
The short answer would be yes, if appropriately justified and demonstrated that it does a sensory stimulation and provides some behavioral health benefit that can be applied from within the environmental system. Yes, conceptually, but it would require justification appropriately.
Great, thank you, Tom. From Alexander, are aircraft parabolic flight or suborbital flights allowed for Appendix B? Do any of the element scientists want to answer this?
I think it says in the call that the answer is yes. For the omnibus?
Yes.
Yeah, we have, this is Peter. It's a little tricky because for 150K for 1 year, it's very difficult to implement. So usually we don't receive that, but it is possible if the budget is and time can allow for it. I don't know, Mike, you know more about the implementation.
All right, great. Next question. Is tissue sharing based research plans allowed for BINI? Yes, they are. From Jared, does a previous NPP count as having previous NASA funding? Manish, do you know this?
No, that would not count.
Great, thank you. From Bethany, skip the question regarding BINI as part of Hero 2020, please address. I don't know what you're talking about. Since I didn't see the question, I don't know what I skipped. So if you could be more specific and respond one more time, that would be great. Thank you. From Thea, thank you for the clear presentation. I understand one should not propose a study for Appendix A that would go beyond 3 years. Would it be acceptable to propose a study of a duration shorter than 3 years, like 2 or even 1? Tom?
You could. What we typically would see is the development characterization of it in the first year, the implementation of it and demonstration of its benefit in the second year, and then kind of the consolidation and how do you generalize it and help identify the guidelines for implementation in the third year. Could that be done in 1 to 2 years? If you had one small thing you're trying to do in the context of the larger call that we've put out, yes, it's possible. It would be difficult to justify it for just a 1 year, potentially 2, but you could always look at the Appendix B to serve as a complement to the 3 year. That's one option that sometimes we've seen individuals do.
Great, thank you. From Shyam, is active shielding using magnetic field still of interest in Appendix B submission? Janice?
Hi, this is Janice. So the space radiation element does not fund shielding research.
Great, thank you. From Pat, can the PI submit more than one proposal? Yes, but they must have different specific aims. You can't do 2 proposals on the same topic. From RG, for BINI, can a US-based private entity in collaboration with university researchers be the main PI for a step 1 proposal? Manish, I don't see any problem with that, do you?
Yes, that will be fine.
Great. From Mark, if selected, when does the program start? Do we have a start date yet, Manish?
It'll be
Anticipated?
sometime of the summer of 2021.
Great. From Baram, is the space radiation part of the omnibus as well? Yes, it is. If not, well, we don't need to do B because yes, it is. So any of the space radiation risks fall well within the omnibus. From David, are NEMO missions possible during the 3-year time frame? We no longer support NEMO missions, so we would discourage you from writing a proposal for NEMO. From Fatme, does a previous EP score count as having previous NASA funding? No, it does not. Manish, you want to check me on that?
Yes, actually, it does count for previous NASA.
Oh, okay. I need to make a note of that because I didn't think it did. Great, thank you, Manish. So the answer is yes, that counts as NASA funding. From BMED BMED-104 gap mentions validated modifications. Do the proposed modifications need to be validated? And if so, do they need to be validated in laboratory and analog setting prior to the study? Tom?
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so the BMED 104 addresses a research gap, and so what we're asking for is the importance of making sure that we identify the modifications and then validate them. So yes, we would look for it to be validated initially in a laboratory, and then we would move it to an analog setting, or you could use the analog as your laboratory, because we do try to set controlled conditions in the NASA analogs as well. So both can apply. You don't have to have a validated process to bring it in. You can use the analog to validate.
All right, great. Thanks, Tom. From JP, for a bidding proposal, is it just that the PI needs to be the new investigator, or can the co-I be a current or past NASA investigator? Manish?
Only the PI needs to be a new investigator. The co-I can be a current or past NASA investigator.
Great, thank you. From Joey, what is the duration of typical HERA campaigns? Mike?
45 days.
That's a mission, right? And then multiple missions make up a campaign?
Is then, yeah, usually within 1 year.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Brandon? Okay.
All right, from Christopher. Within the specific elements, there are diversity of risks. Is there a way to better understand which risks have a higher funding priority? I think the easy way to do that is the red and yellow risks are of a higher priority than the green risks. If we put out a call specifically, so like for Appendix A, that's important for us. If it's an omnibus, they're generally all treated equally. We don't sort them by priority unless it comes down to funding decisions where several proposals are similar. We would then select the one that's a higher priority to be done. Does any element scientist want to weigh in here?
I'll say I think you captured it well. We will tend, for Appendix A, we tend to solicit for those that we consider the highest priority. So if you see a solicitation in the Appendix A that precedes the Omni, you know that's one of our high priority gaps and risks to be addressed. And the Omnis, that's where, as Steve noted, going to the chart to look where are the risks, that gives a higher priority, because certainly we are going to try to fund something that's red, as opposed to we'll look at something yellow if it's innovative, but the red risk we know we've got to address in a more time-sensitive way.
Great, thank you, Tom. From Ali, would robotic technologies be relevant? For example, robots that can work with human and scout risky areas prior to human interaction to increase the safety of humans. Could I get some element scientists to weigh in here?
Yeah, so robotic interactions falls within our human system integration architecture. So that could be done as an omni. It wouldn't address our Appendix A risk, but certainly that I would encourage you to look at the HSIA risk and then look at some of the task book for some of the human-robotic interactions to make sure that you're not proposing something that we've already done and that it's relevant to the human research program, because we're looking more for how we improve the capabilities of the crew or reduce the risk or burden to them, as opposed to sending them into an area ahead of the crew to see how risky it is. That could be part of it, but it needs to do more than just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. From Vince, if we submitted an idea to the previous omnibus call that was due on July 31st, I would like to submit it to Appendix A of this call. Can you, as a step 1, and if the omnibus is not funded, submit a step 2 for Appendix A? Alternatively, can we cancel the omnibus submission if it has already been submitted? You can't submit the same call twice in the same appendix. If you want to submit it again, Manish, can they withdraw?
Yes, Ben, can he withdraw that submission if he wants?
If you go into Inspires, I think the AOR or the PI should be able to withdraw. I'll have to double check on that. I think the rule in the solicitation is that if you are submitting an identical or substantially similar proposal that you submitted to a previous omnibus, then the more recent one is declined unless you've gotten a decision on the previous one.
Great, thank you. I just noticed that I missed one from Mark. Under Appendix A, if an IRB is required for HSR, will NASA provide and fund, or does that funding have to come out of the award? The IRB would be done once you are awarded, and so that would be part of your prep work for the proposal, and it would come out of your award. From Isaac, does sub-PI work on a NASA TRISH grant count against BINI funding? Manish?
As long as the person was not a PI on a TRISH grant, then that's perfectly fine. It won't count against you.
Great, thank you. Curtis, in regards to Appendix A, looking at the cognitive functioning CNS domain, would a combination of psychophysiological stimulation and somatic peripheral enhancement fall under this line? Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yes, that would be consistent with the approach we're looking for. Thank you.
Okay, Bethany, we got back to you. I'm referring to the following question that was not addressed. Is BINI part of the HARO 2020 solicitation? Yes, it is. From Amina, for BINI, are individuals required to be part of a larger organization to apply? I heard you mention that awards are given to the larger organization, but I was not able to hear the part of the answer. So, yes, the way that the funding works is the PIs make the application, but the actual award is to the institution, not to the individual. So you would need to be part of a larger organization, like a university or a company or an institute or something like that. From James Lang, is Appendix B data collection typically take place at analog habitats rather than an institution or university setting? It can be either. We get them from both. So it's totally dependent on what research you're proposing to do. From Caitlin, is there any amount of the funding allowed for stipend? Yes, we do allow stipends. I don't know that we have a limit to that. Manish, do we have a limit?
No.
Okay, great. From Amina, are proposals for revisions to the human rating standard acceptable as submissions to Appendix A?
So I would say that that could potentially be part of it, but that's certainly not what's envisioned. We're really looking for the interaction between a habitat, sensory stimulation, the reduction of monotony, giving individuals something meaningful to do, and how that may impact on brain changes as a result of those interactions. So it could be an outcome. Potentially the human rating standard changes as a result of your effort, but it's not what we're seeking up front. We're seeking an intervention, and then we'll look at how that intervention, when proven, may be used to change a standard.
Great, thank you, Tom. I'm going to skip the comment from Michael only because I don't want it to confuse people. Current hair emissions are 45 days. From Caitlin, when using the term new investigator, is there a specific type of scientific lineage you are looking for? I don't quite know what you're asking. I think you're asking if it has to be a PhD or an MD. I don't believe we have any restrictions on the degrees or the lineage. Manish?
That is correct. You don't need a particular degree to apply.
Excellent, thank you. From Kimya, for the omnibus, is they're interested in a science investigation or development of a countermeasure acceptable? For omnibus, like I said, the main restrictions are it must address one of our risks, and it has to be 1 year or less and a maximum of $150,000. And there are lots of different opportunities for what you can write depending on the specific topic. From Terrence, one of the identified risks in Appendix A is the adverse outcomes due to inadequate human systems. Just let Tom answer this.
Yeah, no, thank you. So what's important about it is we've got 3 different HSIA risks. 102 that really deals with the habitat vehicle systems and the mission scenarios, that the increased automation, that would be part of your intervention. HSIA 2, 103, that would be an onboard intelligence system where we're looking for how much of what system do you interact with. And then 104, the one you make reference to, really talks about how do we change the vehicle and habitat, have some kind of computer interface, and what are the potential decrements that may accrue because of a poorly designed. How do we bring about problem solving and execution procedures that we've incorporated into that intelligence system of 103 and the habitat systems that were addressed in 102. So we would encourage you not to look at just one, but to conceptualize it in a way that integrates the multiple gaps that we've identified in the call. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. From Vince, for Appendix A, is a Step 1 required to submit a Step 2? Yes, it is. From Thea, is a doctoral candidate eligible to apply in the position of PI? Yes, they are. I know that some NIH programs don't allow doctoral candidates or even postdocs to be a PI, but we do not have that restriction. Manish, can you check me on that?
That is correct, Steve. No restriction.
Thank you. From Doug, are Appendix B proposals strictly meant to address risks still requiring mitigation, or can the proposal be for an innovative approach or improvement to an already accepted risk? I'd like to hear what the element scientists think about that. Would you fund a proposal that is addressing an already accepted risk?
No, that's part of our second level of relevancy review. We would not.
This is Peter. Well, we occasionally could do that if it's very innovative, but the likelihood is low.
Great, thank you guys. From Wendy, should we email the HRP element scientist prior to the step 1 submission? That is not a requirement. If you have specific questions to ask the element scientist, then you may email them. From Isaac, is a step 1 required for an Appendix B proposal? Yes, it is. From Rao, medical students, can they apply? Again, I believe we do not have a restriction, so I believe medical students can apply. Manish?
That is correct. They can.
Excellent.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Sorry, I just wanted to put in that while medical students and doctoral candidates can apply, do keep in mind that the AOR has to approve submissions to any of the appendices. So if you are planning to do that from one of those positions, make sure you have arranged with your grants office or business development office or whoever else to make sure they're on board.
Yep, that's a good point, Ben. Thank you. From guest, the first review is NASA or independent of NASA? The first level of review is the merit review, and that is independent of NASA. So that is done by NRES, and they bring in external experts. NASA sits in on those panels to answer any programmatic questions and to give an overview of the program, but we do not participate in the merit review. And then from Rao, JPL engineers, can they submit proposals? Yes, they can. We have funded JPL engineers in the past. Okay, we have 4 minutes left. I don't think I've done this much talking in one of these in a very long time. From Lisa, funding and format, thank you. Thank you very much for listening. We appreciate everyone's participation. From Marufa, can one PI apply several proposals themed for step 1? Thank you. Yes, you can. You just cannot submit the same proposal multiple times, so you should have different specific aims. Should research be applied to Moon or Mars? It depends on the context of the risk that you're applying to. So just read the risk carefully, and then you can decide how you want to respond to it. Will the charts be available after the meeting? Yes, they will. Ben, do you want to give that information again, or do you want to wait till the very end?
The charts, as well as the recording and the Q&A document that has some further information and clarifications on the answers given, will all be posted to the Appendix Inspires pages.
Great, thank you, Ben. From Justin, for the Appendix A, risk of adverse cognitive or behavioral conditions and psychiatric disorders, are you willing to include sociocultural factors, or must this be biomedical? Tom?
And certainly the social cultural can be part of it, as we identify in number 1, the must address. So that could fall under the social stimulation. It could also be part of what you address as part of the individual characteristics and the required deliverables. Like, for example, number 2 on the required deliverables talks about individual differences and how those social cultural aspects may influence your approach. It shouldn't be the main thing, but it could certainly be a qualifier of the approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. From Caitlin, are the risks the same as the HRP risks? Yes, those are from that risk chart, the path to risk reduction that was shown earlier in this presentation. Those are the risks that we're discussing. When will the presentation be put on Inspires? Ben, how long does that typically take?
So the presentation will be up fairly shortly, and the recording and the Q&A will be up by sometime next week.
Great, thank you. From guest, new administration changed things this solicitation. I don't foresee any changes to this solicitation in the time that it would take to be funded. Anything else? We have 1 minute. Delightfully informative. Well, thank you very much. I don't know that I've ever been called delightfully informative before. It must be Tom that they find delightful. Certainly not me. What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? Well, you know, African or European, it really depends. I don't think we can answer that question with the information given. All right, it's 2 o'clock, folks. Thank you very much for your time, for participating. It's very important that we engage the community, and we thank you very much for such engagement. Like I said, I've never had this many quality questions as far as I can remember. So thank you very much. We look forward to reading your proposals. And with that, I will say good afternoon. All right, folks, I'm out. I have a 2 o'clock. Thanks, everybody.